One click is all it takes to lose everything.
We are in a cyber war. You can either be a defendant or you could be a victim.
Security must mature to the point of IT so it can properly be managed. And I'm a big fan of the phrase, you can't manage what you can't measure. Now, one of the reasons why IT is so mature and successful in most organizations is because it has a single metric that can be used for managing it. The 5 nines of IT. Now, if you've never heard of this, most CIOs and most IT departments have a single metric. They have to provide 99.999% uptime availability. If they do that, they're successful and the business is successful. If they don't do that, it's problematic. Now, the issue today is we don't have a 5 nines of security. We have no way to really manage it, and that's problematic. So let's just go ahead and look at the progression. And cybersecurity is about 12 to 15 years behind IT. So it had happened in the late 80s. In the late 80s, companies started playing around with this idea of computers. I remember a lot of computers had the good old Wang computers, right? Some people don't remember that. I tell you, that's one of the things I contribute to my great forearms, my Popeye forearms, is because of the Wang computers. And what I'm referring to is they had the big old cases, and for some reason, when you open them up, they had 3 rows of 9 screws each. So they had 27 screws, but it was a soft metal screw. So if you used an electric screwdriver, it would actually strip the screws. So you had to do it by hand. So you would sit there and you would basically, every time you worked on a Wang computer, you'd have to unscrew 27 screws and then put them back again. So I tell you, build up really good forearm muscles by doing that. But most companies started playing around with computers, Wangs and others, in the late 80s, early 90s. And they realized that these computers needed to be maintained and updated. So they created an information officer and they buried it under operations. Right? The people that manage the facility and other factors, that's where the information officer was. Then, as we progressed through the 90s, and computers just sort of took off, and all of a sudden there were computers everywhere, servers everywhere, and it was an integral part of the business, most companies realized the importance of IT to their success. So that information officer rose up to a chief information officer, and most companies in the mid to late 90s had chief information officers. And they reported directly to the executives because IT was that critical. And in order to manage this IT, they came up with the 5 nines of IT, 99.999% uptime availability. So now, as we went into 2000, most companies had a pretty mature IT department run by a CIO reporting to the execs with a clear metric of management. And that's why IT in most organizations runs smoothly today. Now, security didn't really start to happen until the late 90s. Mid to late 90s, companies started saying, you know something? We might need to play around with security. I remember my first job as a security person was in 1997, and I was the sole person responsible for security, entry-level position, buried under 8 managers under IT. So that's most companies in the late 90s. Yeah, let's play around with security. Let's have some super geek from the CIA in there to give us some advice. But it's not really that much a priority. So then as we move through 2000 and we started getting more of these breaches and more of these issues, you started seeing information security getting more and more important, but it was still buried under IT. And I will tell you, I've said this for a while, you can't have security under IT. It's a conflict of interest. Because if an IT person is responsible for uptime availability, security sometimes impacts that. It has to, it's necessary for the business, but it will. So if your number one method of getting paid as a CIO is uptime availability, you will inadvertently, without realizing it, make bad security decisions. And I tell you, when I said that, people got pissed off, Right? I got so many death threats from CIOs. Oh, Eric, you don't understand. And then as the breaches continued, CIOs didn't want to be responsible. So they're like, take security away. So now today in most companies, and if it's not, you should have a separate CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, that's equal peers with the CIO. They are equals. Now, one of the things, and I inadvertently like pissing off CIOs, is not only did I say it needs to be separate, but really if you look at security, security is really three things. The CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Availability is IT. IT is one of the three pillars of security. So if you really think where it should go, and I think this will happen in 5 or 6 years, is IT is just a subset under your CISO. Your CISO is your highest ranking technology officer reporting to the execs, and then they have confidentiality, integrity, and IT under them reporting in that manner. So that's sort of where I see things going. But today, we have one of the two pieces. We have an executive. We have a Chief Information Security Officer. The problem and the reason why that executive is not successful is we don't have a metric. Actually, we do. We have a bad metric. We have a really, really bad metric, and that's why so many CISOs are getting fired. What is the current 5 nines of security? What is the current metric that companies use today to measure cybersecurity? If we don't have a breach, the CISO is doing their job. If we do have a breach, they failed. How do I know that? Simple. After every major breach, what happens? The CISO gets fired. If that's not a clear indicator that that is their metric, I don't know what is. Now, here's the problem. If your metric is something that's guaranteed to happen, you basically have a death sentence. So most CISOs have death sentences because they're brought in and saying, if there's a breach, you're going to get fired. And oh, by the way, we are definitely going to have a breach. That's crazy. So what you need to do immediately as a CISO, a security, a manager, anyone, this video is for a lot of folks out there, is you got to get a better metric for cybersecurity. Now, I'll be honest with you. I've studied security metrics for a long time. And over 5 years, really trying to come up with the best metric out there. And I'll be honest with you, I'm still searching. I have a metric that I'm going to share with you. It's a lot better than the current metric. It's a lot better than you can't have a breach, and if you do, you're fired. So it's a lot better than the current metric, but it's not perfect. And the reason I say that is when I give this presentation, I have people going, Eric, I don't like your metric. And I'm like, I don't like it either. Do you have anything better? And they're like, no. I'm like, then shut up. I'm joking here, but the point is, I know it's not perfect, but if you have nothing better, use it because it's a lot better than what you currently have today. So here's the 5 nines of security I recommend you use. The 5 nines of security is attempted attacks. How many attempted attacks are there against your organization? Now, here's what I like about this metric. First, it's a positive metric. It's focusing on the fact that you're stopping attackers. I don't like negative metrics. I know a lot of people use vulnerability scanning as a metric. The problem with that is you're basically telling the execs what you're not doing. You're telling them all the holes and issues. So you run to your exec this quarter and go, oh, this quarter we have 300 vulnerabilities we didn't fix. And then next quarter, oh, there's 200 more vulnerabilities we didn't fix. And next quarter, there's another 300 vulnerabilities we didn't fix. You're basically running to them going, look at how much we suck. We suck. We really suck. Right? I don't like negative metrics. Attempted attacks is a positive metric. And here's what I like. Most executives have no clue how bad the problem is. I travel around the world. I do a ton of executive awareness sessions. And when I tell them the real numbers for their company, they're shocked. Most executives think their company has 3 or 4 attempted attacks a week. They don't realize it's 3 or 4 every second. So when I go in and we start telling the executives, you have 9,000 attempted attacks a week. And that's pretty low, by the way. Now, check out what happens. If you go to them every week and go, we had 9,000 attempted attacks, 11, 8,000, 12, and you're telling them these are attacks you are stopping, that if you and your team were not there, they would have got compromised and got broken into. Now watch what happens. Now in 7 or 8 months when you have a breach, the executives are going to say, you know something? I wish we didn't have the breach, but if we're getting 9,000 attempted attacks a week, I guess one will sneak through, and I guess it's not that bad. It puts it in perspective. It puts a proper perspective around it. So that's what I really like around this metric. Finally, in order to have a good metric, it has to be one that's easy to calculate. And it is. What's another word for attempted attacks? Dropped packets in your firewall. So you just go to your firewall, you run a weekly report of the number of dropped packets, and boom, you have your metric. Now, yes, it's not perfect, but it's close enough. I have people going, Eric, drop packet might not necessarily... Stop. Come on. It's close enough for argument's sake. We're not trying to get it perfect. We want to get it close enough to get that target, and that's good enough for this purpose. So I would recommend that if you don't have good metrics in place for security, use attempted attacks. Use the drop packets in your firewall. Trust me on this. Even if you don't believe me that it's perfect, and it's not, it's a lot better than what you have today. What I'm trying to do is incrementally improve you. I'm trying to get you closer to an ideal state, not an ideal state. So make sure you have a good metric. Make sure you use attempted attacks. And then drop me a note, ecole@secureanchor.com, and let me know how that's working out for you.